adenoviral vector, the adenoviral vector vaccines. May you unmute for a second and just say that aloud with me? Adenoviral vector. Can you say that aloud? All right, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So we've got the adenoviral vector vaccines. Now, how do these work? So with these vaccines, it's similar to the mRNA vaccines. What they do is they again take away the genetic material of the coronavirus. They modify it so that it does not replicate or multiply in the human body. And when it's modified, they then put it into the envelope of another virus called an adenovirus. Okay, so adenoviruses are the viruses that cause common colds. You know your common colds where you're sneezing and so on. These are those viruses that cause this. So what they do is they take the genes of coronavirus, they weaken them, they modify them so they're not harmful to you, and then they put them in the envelope of the adenovirus. Then this is what they then inject into the human being. And using the envelope of the adenovirus, it then binds your body cells and it inoculates these genes into your body cells. And these genes of coronavirus then go to your ribosomes, not the nucleus, not the DNA, where they'll modify DNA and change your human characteristics. No. They go to the ribosomes and they use the ribosomes to make proteins, which are then presented to the cells of your body, the surface of the cell, and these are then detected by your lymphocytes, your white blood cells, and you make antibodies against coronavirus, which you can then use to neutralize any new infection in the future. So this is basically how it works. Now, these are the adenoviral vector vaccines, and examples of these are your Sputnik, your AstraZeneca, your Johnson & Johnson. They work using this particular technology, the RNA of coronavirus weakened and the body or the envelope of an adenovirus. Then we've got the attenuated whole virus vaccines, the attenuated whole virus vaccines. And this is basically, they take the entire structure of coronavirus, and what they essentially do is they weaken it so that it does not multiply. It can no longer multiply. It cannot replicate, cannot cause any illness. And when they modified it, they then inoculate this weakened virus into you, and it still possesses its proteins. It still possesses its spike proteins. And using those spike proteins, your body then develops antibodies against the coronavirus. And these antibodies will now be part of your memory, your immune memory, to combat the disease in the future. So this is essentially how these attenuated whole virus vaccines work. It's the actual structure of coronavirus that is weakened. It cannot replicate, it cannot multiply, cannot do anything. So this is essentially how this particular vaccine works. And examples of these types of vaccines, you've got your Sinopharm, your Sinovac, your Covaxin. This one is from India. So that's how they basically work. And I hope this clarifies the technology behind the vaccines. And just as a note, as I said earlier on, because of accelerated development of vaccines, these new technologies, the mRNA, the adenoviral vector vaccines, are relatively new technologies that have been discovered because of an enhanced understanding of disease, technology, the Human Genome Project, and so on. Now, there are a number of conspiracy theories that have emanated with regards to the vaccines, a number of conspiracy theories that have emanated. Some of these conspiracy theories, for example, they say that the vaccines do not work. They do not work. Remember, we said earlier on that vaccines actually go through a multi-stage process before they're released. And a number of bodies look at the research, they look at the data, and then they release their reports to validate the efficacy of the vaccines. And, you know, as we say in scripture, by the testimony of two or more witnesses shall a matter be established. So this, I believe, this multi-stage process, which involves several regulatory bodies from different countries and has allowed to ensure that whatever is coming on the market has at least gone through a rigorous regulatory process before it has been released into the public domain, especially for those vaccines that have been approved by global bodies like World Health Organization, or bodies that we know have a robust, should I say, value chain in terms of releasing new therapies like the CDC and so on. So this cannot be validated. Vaccines actually work, and they use the same technology that has benefited us with polio, that has benefited us with smallpox, with measles, and so on. Another theory that seems to have emanated with the vaccines is that they create some kind of magnetism, right? That, with the 5G technology and so on, actually there's a conspiracy theory to say that, the 5G technology has actually created the coronavirus through a magnetic process and so on and so on. This has not been validated, and we cannot subscribe to it because there's no evidence to suggest any of this is actually true. You will not become a magnet if you are inoculated with the vaccines. That is patently false. The other assertion is that vaccines cause more variants. Vaccines cause more variants. Let's look at how variants actually emerge. So remember, we spoke about the structure of coronavirus, and we said that it has a gene, it has the RNA strand. Now that RNA strand determines the characteristics of the spike proteins, the membrane proteins, and the structure of coronavirus. Now, when that RNA strand is multiplying in the human system, it sometimes makes mistakes in copying the code. And when it makes those mistakes, we call them mutations. Those mistakes result in different characteristics of the virus that then emerges from that multiplication process. So what actually causes more variants is actually more multiplication of the virus, not vaccines. Variants emerge when the virus has been given an opportunity to multiply in an unchecked, unregulated, uncontrolled manner. And this is typically found where you've got people who are gathered in large numbers. If you remember in India, the Kumbh Mela festival, where they said there were about 5 to 12 million people were gathered for the Indian religious festival. And in that setting, which we call a super spreader events, you are likely to get the emergence of new variants because there are so many people who are getting infected with the virus. It's multiplying in so many different individuals at any given time. And in one of those individuals, you may get a mutation that results in a variant of concern, a VOC, which will then have new characteristics that may make it more virulent, make it more dangerous, and so on. And this is how essentially the Delta variant came about. And this is how these variants of concerns come about, when the virus is allowed to multiply unchecked, not with the vaccines. The vaccines actually reduce the chances of variants emerging because they neutralize the virus before it can infect a cell and multiply within the cell. Infertility. There are concerns that the vaccines will cause infertility. Now, there is no evidence whatsoever to suggest that the vaccines can cause infertility. In fact, it has been found that in men who are infected with coronavirus, that the virus has been found in specimens of their semen. So if anything is going to cause infertility in anybody, it is actually the virus itself, not the vaccine. The virus has been found in specimens of human semen analysis taken from men who are infected with coronavirus has actually detected that they possess the virus within the semen. And in the semen, if it's in the semen, it is more likely, it then therefore means that there must be some inflammatory process that may be occurring within the testicles, and this may actually lead to your concerns of infertility, not the vaccine. No evidence suggests that the vaccine causes any of that. And remember, we mentioned earlier on that the vaccines do not go into your nucleus. They do not go to your DNA. They do not change your DNA of your cells. So they do not change your characteristics as a human being. What they do is they recruit the protein manufacturing factories of your body cells, the ribosomes. And they use these to make virus proteins, which will then be used as a template to make antibodies. So the issue of infertility is unsubstantiated. Government has put microchips in the vaccines to track you. So this is another conspiracy theory that has emerged recently, and this is where part of our topic emanates from, because some people then believe that this vaccine is a microchip that Bill Gates and various foundations have put microchips to track you, to find out what you're doing, what you're thinking, to control your mind, to make you then worship the beast of Revelation and so on. Some even believe this is the vaccines are the 666, the devil's number and so on. So all these conspiracy theories, especially about governments putting microchips into the vaccines, cannot be substantiated by any kind of evidence. There's no evidence to substantiate it. So again, we condemn this conspiracy theory that the vaccine has caused autism. There's no evidence to that effect. That the vaccine will rewrite your DNA. It will change your DNA. We have already mentioned that it does not go into your nucleus. So it will not change your DNA. And then, of course, people are concerned, what about the long-term side effects and so on and so on? Are you sure that these vaccines will be safe in the long term? And as we have said earlier on, that these vaccines that we currently have are born out of a foundation of an improved understanding of how the human body works. They do not alter your DNA. And generally, for vaccine technology, most long-term effects do not last beyond a month or 3 months rather. So these would have been noted in prior studies and prior investigations. And there's no evidence to suggest that there will be long-term deleterious effects, such as the infertility and so on that people are speaking about. Other conspiracy theories to do with coronavirus in general. Some people believe that since alcohol neutralizes the virus, why don't we just all drink alcohol? Because it can then neutralize the virus in our upper respiratory tract. I think that's a good mechanism, and this has been rebuffed and refuted. Drinking excessive amounts of alcohol will not neutralize the coronavirus, because remember, you need a concentration of more than 60%, and generally that is dangerous for consumption. Then there are some people in Israel who believed that through religious instruction, they believed that as long as you have the Torah within a 30 or so centimeter vicinity, it's likely to repel the coronavirus. So these are other theories that are emerging that have no substantiation whatsoever. In India, during one of the lockdowns, the Janata curfew in 2020, a theory emerged that if people then clapped all at once, the vibrations will then destroy the coronavirus. Again, this has been unsubstantiated. Hot beverages, so people are saying the more tea you drink, the more hot beverages you drink at a temperature of above 30 degrees Celsius, this will kill the virus in your system and so on. Again, these are conspiracy theories that cannot be substantiated. So there are a lot. The World Health Organization has actually said that in addition to the pandemic of coronavirus, we have an infodemic of false theories, conspiracy theories surrounding the virus, surrounding the vaccines, surrounding therapies, surrounding our governments, and so on. And all these have created a fertile ground for individuals to reject and refuse emerging therapies that may be of actual benefit to them in the mitigation, the management, and the prevention of coronavirus. All these theories, they are protein. There are so many of them. I could not list a large number of these theories. Now, coming to the Adventist movement, within our movement, this blessed movement, there is a debate with regards to the vaccines. One group of people say shall we vaccinate individuals? The other group says, no, we should not vaccinate individuals. Now, the basis of this divide within this movement, or within our movement, is that there is the pro-drug lobby and the no-drug lobby, okay? So there are two schools of thought within the movement. One school of thought believes that drugs can and should be used. One school of thought says to take drugs in any way, shape, or form is regarded as a sin, and therefore we cannot take drugs. We must rely entirely on natural therapies, as mentioned earlier on: nutrition, exercise, water, sunshine, temperance, air, rest, trust in God, herbal treatments, and we must restrict our management of coronavirus to that. We must advise governments that that is the only way that we can mitigate against this virus. All other methods are not to be subscribed to, especially those that involve the use of drugs. Masking up, social distancing is acceptable to this lobby, but the use of any drug medication, whether it be steroids, whether it be anticoagulants, whether it be oxygen therapy, whether it be vaccines, is unacceptable, because to them, this is not what is prescribed, and so on and so on. I put together a few statements from Ellen White, some inspired thoughts from what she wrote with regards to drugs. And I just want my Adventist brethren who are listening in and are tuned in to just come through some of these quotations with me so that we can see where we stand with regards to this particular issue. This is what Ellen White says in Counsels to the Church. And I'm going to read this in your hearing. You may also read it where you are. It says, "A practice that is laying the foundation of a vast amount of disease and of even more serious evils is the free use of poisonous drugs." Take note. If you have a piece of paper, write it down. The free use of poisonous drugs. When attacked by disease, many will not take the trouble to search out the cause of the illness, right? Their chief anxiety is to rid themselves of pain and inconvenience. By the use of poisonous drugs, that word again, many bring upon themselves lifelong illness, and many lives are lost that might be saved by the use of natural methods of healing. Capture that. Instead of using poisonous drugs, which bring lifelong illness, why not use natural methods? The poisons contained, listen to that, the poisons contained in many so-called remedies create habits, okay? So some of these remedies had some kind of poisons within them that created habits and appetites that mean ruin to both soul and body. Many of the popular nostrums, all right, or the concoctions, called patent medicines, and even some of the drugs that are dispensed by physicians, act a part in laying the foundation of the liquor habit, the opium habit, the morphine habit, that are so terrible a curse to society. Drug medication, capture this, as it is generally practiced, is a curse. Educate away from drugs. Use them less and less and depend more upon hygienic agencies. Then nature will respond to God's physicians. Pure air, pure water, proper exercise, a clear conscience. Those who persist in the use of tea, coffee, and flesh meats will feel the need of drugs. But many might recover without one grain of medicine if they would obey the laws of health. Drugs need seldom be used. So this quotation encapsulates the foundation upon which a lot of the debate has emerged within the Adventist movement. For the anti-drug lobby, they have taken this quotation to mean that any drug whatsoever is poisonous, is habit-forming, is likely to have deleterious effects, and should be avoided. It is actually a curse to use any drug, whether it be paracetamol, whatever it is. That's the anti-drug lobby. They've taken this statement to mean that drugs in the days of Ellen White in our time to the second coming are a sin to be avoided, like the curse. Then we have the pro-drug lobby, who have a different view of thought, a different school of thought. So the pro-drug lobby, there's a basis with which they use to analyze these statements from Ellen White. So the pro-drug, or the drugs are acceptable lobby, choose to take the statements of inspiration, the statements of Ellen White, in the context in which she was living. They take the wording of her quotation, the frequent references to poisons, the frequent references to habit forming, to mean that the context of drug use in her time was a dangerous smorgasbord, or a dangerous compendium of mixtures and therapies that were more dangerous, more likely to cause habits, more likely to cause death than in our present time. So that school of thought that believe that drugs are acceptable, that drugs are not a sin, that drugs are not a curse, will say that in the context in which she wrote her statements, the use of drug medication was indeed dangerous, was less beneficial to health, was more likely to lead to habits, dangerous habits, or to death. The universal application adherents, those who are the anti-drug movements, believe that her statements have universal application then, in that context, and in our present context. So this is the basis of the divide. One group is saying the context must be taken into account. The other group is saying the context is irrelevant. What she says goes, and anyone who defies her statements is working against faith. They are disobeying God. They are under a curse. They are introducing dangerous substances into the temple of the Lord, and as such, they are sinning against God. And as part of this general school of thought, things like vaccinations, things like transfusions, things like radiotherapy, chemotherapy, drug medications of any kind are considered a sin because of the statements of Ellen White that they've taken, and they've said the context in which she wrote is irrelevant to the matter at hand. We believe that when she said a drug is a sin in her time, it is a sin in our time. So let's analyze a little bit about the context and look at the understanding, because the universal application is patently clear. They do not believe that the context means anything. So let's look at the context in which she wrote her statements, and hopefully by using the context, we can then understand where the drugs are okay to use lobby gets their reasoning from. So the context of 19th century, that's the 1800s, that's the 19th century. What was the context of medicine? Now, the theory of disease that was applicable in the 19th century, in the 1800s, was the four humors theory that was developed in 131, or in the second century AD by the famous Roman physician Galen. So that theory continued for 1600 years, 1700 years into the 18th century. And that theory believed that all disease, whether it's a headache, a cough, a skin rash, is a result of an imbalance between certain humors. There were four humors in the human body. There was black bile, green bile, yellow bile, and so on. So his theory believed that every individual has a balance of these four humors, or these four chemical components. And when there's an imbalance, when one component is more than the other, it then results in disease. This theory was the dominant theory for the next 1600 years. And it was carried forward to the 19th century when Ellen White wrote about drug usage. In addition to this theory, there was another theory called the miasma or miasmata theory, whereby disease is as a result of bad odors that you breathe in. And when you breathe these in, they result in disease, they result in rashes, headaches, and so on. So these were the dominant theories that were applied in the 19th century context in which Ellen White wrote. And at the time, the germ theory was not widely known, was not widely applied until late into the 19th century, beyond 1880, beginning, of course, with the American Civil War and beyond. So the germ theory was not widely known, it was not widely applied. So some of the therapies that were in common usage in the time of Ellen White, in which she wrote some of these statements against drug use, where she calls them poisonous drugs, where she says they should be avoided, where she says they are habit forming, where she says that they are a curse upon humanity. Some of the drugs, examples of drugs that were given to even little children, were the following. Arsenic, pulverized arsenic, was given to individuals to cure common ailments like common cold, like flus, right? And you know, arsenic was used by a certain group called the Nazis when they wanted to kill themselves and so on. They used all these poisons to kill themselves. They would have pills of it in their mouths. And when they were about to be captured, to avoid capture and arrest and so on, they would break the pill and swallow the poison and they would die. So arsenic was a popularly used ingredient to many of the concoctions of that time. Lead was also used, lead acetate, carbonate, and plastic. They were used all over the place. We only discovered that lead was a very poisonous element later on in the 20th century. Mercury was a common ingredient of the pills used in that time. So this is just a tip of the iceberg. There were many other practices and theories that were not based on how the human body works, that were not based on how poisonous certain elements and chemicals are to the human body, or how chemicals interact with the human body. There were so many therapies in common usage for little children all the way to adults that were being used in the time that Ellen White wrote her warnings against drug medications. Some of the treatments were the cocaine toothache drops. In other words, if your little child had a toothache, all you needed to do was look for your local medicine man, ask him for toothache drops, and they'll give you a little bottle which contained cocaine to go and give your little child to ingest. And with that cocaine, your child would, they would claim that the child would be relieved from the symptoms. Even adults would have these treatments given them. And we all know that cocaine is habit forming, it's addictive, it's a positive poison. And it is this type of treatment which was prevalent in Ellen White's days. I don't have time to speak about all the things like morphine, opium, and all these, which were commonly used drugs in the context in which Ellen White wrote. Some of the treatments even that were used at that time was this electric belt. Now, men, you must thank, I don't know, the germ theory, should I say, or you should thank the development of science that you are not a candidate for this electric belt. So for men with, say, diabetes, high blood pressure, who had impotence issues, they would then be given this contraption called the electric belt, which would then be applied around their waist. Then they'll put a little wire through your urethra, right? So they'll put the wire through your urethra and push it all the way back. No matter whether you're bleeding, whether you're in pain, we want to cure you of impotence. Then they'll switch on the electric shock therapy and they'll electrocute you. So this was another common therapeutic, should I say, treatment of the time. I will not speak about bleeding, whereby they spoke about the four humors and said, no, you've got too much of black bile in you. Let's open you up and let's bleed you out to remove all the dangerous chemicals in you. That was the practice of medicine in the time of Ellen White. It was a dangerous exercise, introducing many dangerous poisonous substances onto the populace. And in the context of that, Ellen White was given instruction that we must, the way medicine is generally, right? the way medicine is generally practiced, is wrong. We would rather stay away from medicines. Here's the statement here. Drug medication as it is, not as it will be, as it is generally practiced, is a curse. And we've seen from this slide, the next slide, that indeed it was a curse. How can you introduce cocaine? How can you introduce arsenic? How can you give people lead and mercury as treatments? Little children were given these as treatments. In that context, she wrote her advice with regards to drug medication. So those who take the context of her writings believe that she wrote within the context of the knowledge of medicine at that time. These people who believe in the context believe that as medicine, as the germ theory was introduced in the late 19th century and advanced going forward, those advances in medicine, in drug production, in drug manufacturing and development, that now took account of how the body actually works, of what works, what doesn't. That kind of medicine is acceptable and is a different context to the one Ellen White was living in. In fact, we will find that in her own lifetime, wherever there were advances in medical science, advances that were safe, that were based on an understanding of human physiology, she was always there to encourage that individuals adopt those new advances. With regards to blood transfusions, she says this, and she said this to a Dr. Chris. She says, there is one thing that has saved life, an infusion of blood from one person to another. But this would be difficult and perhaps impossible for you to do. I merely suggest it. It was impossible then. It is possible now. And it is an advance in medicine that has not only helped people with bone disorders, bone marrow disorders, aplastic anemias, people in shock, hemorrhagic shock from accidents, and so on, people in theater who are bleeding out, have received blood transfusions. And she spoke about it as a therapy, a treatment that was beginning to be introduced in a time very difficult to do. It was impossible then, but in our time, it is prevalent. Regarding vaccination, this is what we have with regards to an eyewitness. This is D.E. Robinson, who was one of Ellen White's secretaries. Now, this guy, this gentleman called D.E. Robinson was actually one of the editors of The Great Controversy, one of the most important books in the pantheon of books of inspiration that are passed down from our pioneers, if not the most important book. He is one of the editors who edited that book, and he was one of the many secretaries that Ellen White would work with to help to edit her writings and so on, and the grammar and etc. and etc. And this is what he had to say. It was in response to someone who asked about vaccination. This is what he wrote. You ask for definite and concise information regarding what Sister White wrote about vaccination and serum. This question can be answered very briefly, for so far as we have any record, she did not refer to them in any of her writings. So if you check in her writings, she does not say anything for vaccination, she does not say anything against vaccination in any of her writings. Let's read the next statement. You will be interested to know, however, that at a time when there was an epidemic of smallpox in the vicinity, she herself was vaccinated and urged her helpers, those connected with her, to be vaccinated. In taking this step, Sister White recognized the fact that it has been proven that vaccination either renders one immune from smallpox or greatly lightens its effects if one does come down with it. She also recognized the danger of their exposing others if they failed to take this precaution. Signed, D.E. Robinson. So he wrote this testimony based on what he saw and what he heard and what he was encouraged by Ellen White to do during a smallpox epidemic, a localized epidemic in their area, in their locale. He says that Ellen White herself was vaccinated. Beyond being vaccinated, she encouraged those who worked with her to be vaccinated. And she gave reasons for this, to say that it will mitigate the effects of the disease upon yourself, and it will reduce your chances of passing it on to others. So in this, she recognized that vaccination was an emerging technology that would have beneficial effect going down. If you look at this statement coming from selected messages, which she wrote herself. Remember, we spoke about the pro-modern medicine front, and those who believe that modern medicine is a positive evil. Things like radiotherapy are not to be subscribed to. They are a positive evil. They are worse off than just leaving people and letting people stick to just one thing. Let them stick to natural methods, because that's what was written to the exclusion of context. This is what she says herself. For several, and this is regarding radiotherapy treatment that she received. She says, for several weeks, I took treatment with the X-ray for the black spot that was on my forehead. In all, I took 23 treatments, and these succeeded in entirely removing the mark. For this, I am very grateful. Ellen White said this to her son, J.E. White, that she underwent an emerging therapeutic treatment known as X-ray, which we call today radiotherapy, where she had a cancerous spot on her forehead, with which she underwent 23 treatments of exposure to X-ray, to radiation. And after that exposure, that spot fell away and disappeared for good. And she was grateful for that advance in medical science. So from these few quotations and many others, where she speaks about the Jesus sending his angels to be with surgeons in theater when they're doing the operation, she says that he is there to give wisdom to the surgeons, to help their minds and their hands to operate upon the patient. But we know that in theater, there is the use of chloroform, there's the use of anesthetic agents and a whole host of other drugs that are used to anesthetize someone and to bring them back from anesthesia. In that context, she says that the angels are present in theater to assist the surgeon. She does not condemn surgical practice. She actually says the Lord works with surgeons in the context of that usage. So the understanding of this context and their attitude towards advancing light and knowledge with medical science has led those who believe that the context in which she wrote her statements against drugs, against certain therapies that were prevalent in her time, was based on the context in which she lived. She embraced advances in medical science based on her example to those who were closest to her and their own statements to her own loved ones. She embraced advances in medical science. And as knowledge of science has progressed from her time to now, a lot of things that were practiced in the early days of germ theory have fallen away as more and more understanding has come. This does not take away from the preeminence of lifestyle as the major backbone of preventative medicine, as the major backbone of therapeutic medicine. It does not take away from that, but it supplements, I'll say supplement, in the sense that the use of modern therapeutic agents is not a sin with regards to those who believe that Ellen White's statements with regards to this matter must be taken in their context. So that is what Ellen White has to say. Now, the final stretch of our discussion is the issue to do with the mark of the beast. Now, this issue has arisen within the church. It has also arisen outside the church, where people believe that the vaccine or the virus itself are part of some global conspiracy to infuse the mark of the beast in individuals. That's one school. Then there's another school within the church that believes that this tendency of governments to begin to force individuals to take the vaccine is a prelude to the introduction of laws that are against God's will and that are contrary to God's will, that shall be soon introduced, and that we should shy away from these vaccines because they are a component of the mark of the beast. So we want to look at the mark of the beast in the book of Revelation and try to understand the basis of this final test that shall come upon humanity. Is the mark of the beast about vaccinations? Is the mark of the beast about drugs? Is the mark of the beast about modern medicine? Is the mark of the beast about accepting modern treatments? What is the mark of the beast? And what is the underlying issue at hand with regards to the mark of the beast that differentiated from our notions and ideas about vaccines, about drugs, about the coronavirus, and so on? Let's look at what the Bible has to say. I'll ask you to turn with me in your Bibles to the book of Revelation, and we will begin with chapter 13, verse 1. I'll read in your hearing. And what we want to do is we just want to pick elements of the sequence of events. And having picked these elements, we want to look at examples of the same sequence of events in prior history, so that we develop a working pattern of what the mark of the beast will entail and what it means for God's people and what it means to be faithful when the mark of the beast shall be applied. Let's read together from verse 1. It says, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy." So John is standing by the seaside in vision, and he sees a sea creature that comes out of the sea. And this creature has 7 heads, and it has 10 horns, and on the horns are 10 crowns. Verse 2, "And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority." So we're now told that this beast has certain features, physical features. Number 1, its skin was like a leopard skin. Its feet were the feet of a bear. Its mouth was the mouth of a lion. And the dragon, another creature mentioned in Revelation 12, gave this particular beast its power, its seat, and its great authority. Verse 3, "And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And they worshipped the beast, which gave power unto the beast, the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And they were given unto him a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given to him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his temple, and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And power was given him over kindreds and tongues and nations." Summary, what is this saying? It's describing a religious organization, because we read in verse 4 that this beast, right, is worshipped. So there's a religious organization we're dealing with here. This religious organization blasphemes God. This religious organization persecutes God's people. That's the nature of this religious organization. Now, we find that this religious organization at some point received a wound, a deadly wound. In other words, its power was taken away from it. Its power was taken away from it. This religious organization that changes God's laws, blasphemes God, persecutes God's people, it likes being worshipped. At some point after its biography of mayhem and destruction, it received a wound. It became weak. It lost some of its authority, its power to execute its malign objectives. Now, we are told in the next sequence of verses that there is another beast that arises, not from the sea, but this time from the land. Verse 11, and I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon, and he exercises all the power of the first beast before him, and he causes the earth and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. Capture that. Let's go to verse 15. And he, meaning this land earth beast, had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. And no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. May God add a blessing to the reading of his word. We are told in the book of Revelation that there is a sea beast, a sea creature. This sea creature looks like a leopard. He has the feet of a bear. He has the mouth of a lion. He has 10 horns with 10 crowns. This creature, representing a religious organization, throughout its history, has persecuted God's people. It has changed the laws of God to suit its own purposes. It has basically gone and run amok. But at a certain time in its history, its power has been removed from it. And when its power has been removed, it has been languishing in a powerless state for some time. But the Bible tells us that another organization is going to arise. This organization has political power and influence on a global scale, because this organization has power to cause the entire world to dance to its tune. This power, this political entity, will give new life, new power to the religious entity that came before it. And it will cause this religious political union to be formed, a religious and a political power to be formed, which will enact certain laws, certain regulations, which if people do not adhere to them, they will be punished by economic sanctions and eventually death. And the Bible is clear that those who adhere to these regulations, those who keep these regulations, those who worship the beast instead of worshiping God, will receive a mark on their hand or on their foreheads, which is called the mark of the beast. It is an issue to do with worship. It is an issue to do with the law of God. This human organization creates laws that are contrary to the law of God, and it will eventually use the political muscle of the world to force human beings to disobey the law of God. And when those who choose to disobey the law of God so choose, the Bible says a spiritual mark will be put upon them in the records in heaven. This mark in the record books is called the mark of the beast, and it will mark those individuals who choose to disobey God and choose to obey the laws of men. It will mark those individuals for eternal death and destruction when Christ shall come again. So the mark of the beast is not a vaccine. The mark of the beast is not a virus. The mark of the beast is not a microchip. The mark of the beast is not a garment. The mark of the beast is not some strange theory. The mark of the beast is a sign of where your allegiance is going to lie. Is your allegiance going to lie with the law of God when the test shall come, or your allegiance is going to lie in the laws of men, in the laws of your church, in the laws of your organization that are contrary to the laws of God. That is the issue of the mark of the beast. Calling the vaccines the mark of the beast is a distraction from the true global event that is soon to break upon humanity. The final test that will be applied to humanity to see whether or not you stand with God, or you stand with the laws of men, or you stand with convenience. This is not new. Satan has always operated on this level. If you go back to the Old Testament, you will find that the same experience occurred to Daniel. Just to summarize Revelation 13 before we go to Daniel, we have a religious organization. This religious organization has a character that it wants to change the law of God, or has changed it. It blasphemes God. It persecutes God's people, or has persecuted God's people in its history. That power to do so has been taken away from it temporarily. But in the not so distant future, a political power is going to arise that is going to give political power, military power, autocratic power to the religious organization, so that the religious organization now has the power of the military and authority to force the world to worship according to its rules and regulations. These rules and regulations are in contrast to the law of God. Obedience to the regulations of this religious power will be in conflict to the laws of God. Two groups are going to emerge. Those who will be faithful to God when the test shall come, when that law shall come, when that test shall come. And those who will not be faithful, who choose convenience, who choose economic benefits, who choose not to be persecuted, who choose comfort. Two groups are going to emerge. Those who stand with God and those who stand with this religious political organization. And those who stand with that organization in terms of the law of God will receive a spiritual mark known as the mark of the beast. This is not a this is something that has happened even in the Old Testament. If you go back to the book of Daniel, if you remember in chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar made a tall golden statue in the plain of Judah. And Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, forced all, both rich and poor, slave and free, to worship and bow down to this statue. Now, among the crowd and the audience at this inauguration ceremony, there were 3 Hebrew boys. These 3 Hebrew boys refused to break the law of God, wherein the law said, "Thou shalt not make a graven image, thou shalt not bow down to it, thou shalt not worship it." They refused to bow down to Nebuchadnezzar's image. And when they refused to bow down to that image, the representatives of this new religion that Nebuchadnezzar, the political power, had come up with, the representatives came and complained to Nebuchadnezzar. These were the magicians, the astrologers, the wise men of Babylon. And they reported that there are 3 Hebrew boys who refused to bow to the image, who refused to obey the laws of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar was so angry, he called these gentlemen and he said, "I'm going to give you another chance to obey me or obey your God. You need to choose. But take note, if you disobey me, the religious political authority, I am going to cast you into the fiery furnace. And these three Hebrew boys stood their ground and said, you don't need to repeat the whole ceremony for us to change our minds. We will not bow down to your image because it is against the law of God. So they refused to bow down, and Nebuchadnezzar was so mad. He heated the furnace 7 times, its normal heat, and he sent his strongest men in the army to throw these Hebrew boys into the furnace. And when they were thrown in, Christ appeared and delivered them. And when he delivered them, Nebuchadnezzar realized the futility of his grand enterprise. You will find the same elements as we have found in Revelation chapter 13. There is a political power, the king, Nebuchadnezzar. There is the religious power, the magicians, the astrologers, the wise men of Babylon. There is the issue of worship. Who shall you worship? Do you worship man? Do you worship God? There's the issue of the law of God, and there's the issue of the laws of men, which we find shall be the test at the end of time, in our time. There is going to be persecution of those who refuse to listen to the laws of men. Then there's going to be deliverance. So the same sequence of events, the same political religious actors are going to be superimposed in our time. And the issue is revolving around worship, revolving around the law of God. Do you obey God or the rules of men? That's what the mark of the beast is about. It is not about vaccination. It is not about drugs. It is not about any of the prevailing theories that are circulating right now. Microchips, Bill Gates, no. The issue revolves around the law of God. Will you obey God through his law, or will you obey the dictates and statutes of men? Will you be able to stand when men shall use military power and might to persecute you because you choose to stand with God? When God says do this, you choose God. What do you choose? That was the issue in the days of Daniel. It is going to be the issue in our time. It was not the last time in the book of Daniel that we find the same test coming upon God's people. In Daniel 6, we find again that a new king is on the throne, Darius the Mede. Now, Darius set up his kingdom into provinces. And when he had set it into provinces, he appointed governors for each province. And then he had 3 leading rulers or governors, of which Daniel was the leading one. And what happened was, the other governors were jealous of Daniel because he was preferred above them. This Hebrew guy is preferred above us. So they moved the political power, they moved Darius to enact a law that said that no one can worship any other god except Darius for 30 days. Now, when this law was enacted, this law of humanity, this law of man was enacted, Daniel continued his routine of worshiping God. He went and he prayed towards Jerusalem 3 times a day, and he was seen praying to another god who was not Darius. Now, when these other governors saw this, they reported Daniel, the faithful servant of God, to the political power. And the political power was forced by the laws to then cast Daniel into the lion's den. We all know the story that Daniel was eventually delivered from the lion's den, and those who wanted to persecute him eventually met his fate. Let's look again at the key elements. There is a political power, Darius. There is a religious power, or a power enforcing religious observance, which is the governors. There is an issue of worship. There is an issue to do with the law of God and the law of men. There is the issue of the persecution of the faithful few who refuse to disobey God when the test comes. And at the end of it all, those who are faithful, despite the inconvenience they shall go through, shall be delivered from the den of lions, from persecution. So it was in the days of Daniel. So it was in the days of his 3 colleagues. So it shall be in our time. my dear friends, a time is coming, a time has come when your faithfulness to the will of God is going to be put to the test. Right now, every decision you make on a day-to-day is telling you, or is telling where you shall put your allegiance when religious and political powers shall unite to enact laws against the law of God and enforce the whole world to worship and adhere to those laws that are contrary to the law of God. Those who choose to obey God are going to be persecuted. They're going to go through economic sanctions, political sanctions. They're going to go through hardship, hunger, strife, imprisonment. But they are going to remain true to God. And these will receive the seal of the living God. Then there is a group that will say, no, I will choose convenience. I will choose to listen to the laws of men. I will choose to obey the laws of the land. And they will choose to disobey God by so doing. And when they do this, they receive the mark of their allegiance to the world, which is the mark of the beast. This is the true and critical issue underlying the final test that shall come to humanity. The mark of the beast is not vaccination. The mark of the beast is not drug therapy. The mark of the beast is not radiotherapy. The mark of the beast is not any modern method of medical practice. The mark of the beast revolves around the law of God. Go to the Decalogue. I challenge you today. Look through the 10 commandments. The final test to humanity shall emanate from one of those laws. The world is going to unite behind a religious political order, which will enforce disobedience to one of those commandments. Your obedience to the laws of the world will ensure that you receive the mark of the beast. It is a religious matter. It is a matter of worship. It is a matter of the law of God. This is the issue at hand. So my dear friends, as we come to a close with regards to this topic, this is the standpoint of the Seventh-day Adventist movement. Vaccination is an individual choice. No man, whether church, should force you to be vaccinated or not to be vaccinated. It's your choice, number one. Number two, vaccination is not a test. It is not a test of faith. It is not a test of whether you are receiving the mark of the beast. The mark of the beast has everything to do with the law of God. Finally, there is the church position and their individual opinions and positions. I am going to say this right now. Let not your individual opinion override, supersede the collective position of the Church of God. There is a sequence, there is a process that is followed when you wish to change the official standpoint of the Church of God, where 2 or 3 shall bind a thing on earth with regards to God's church, then it is bound in heaven. Insofar as vaccination is concerned, the Seventh-day Adventist position is vaccination is not a sin against God. Your opinion may be that it is a sin, but that opinion must remain your opinion and must not be forced upon others who see differently. We are allowed to coexist with those 2 different positions. And we must be aware that those 2 different positions do not constitute the final test upon humanity. They do not constitute a test. I think with those final words, I would like to thank you so much and hand over to our coordinators. Thank you so much, everyone, for the patience and for listening through. we'll now open the floor to a few questions, and then we'll close this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mapondera. That really was a mouthful. You took us through medical lesson, a historical study, and then finally we then delved on the Bible, what it really says about the mark of the beast. Now, because of our time, and I think for an orderly prosecution of our question and answer section, allow me to invite anyone that has got a question. Please just write your question in the comment section or in the chat section of this Zoom session, and then we'll be able to tackle that question. Perhaps what I am going to do, Dr. Mapondera, if you can just go to your WhatsApp, I am going to forward to you the written questions that have been sent to us, and then we are going to tackle those one by one. So there are about 5 questions. Anyone with any other question, please just feel free to just post your questions, and then Dr. Mapondera will be able to tackle them. I think the first one is relating to the issue of vaccines. I think you explained the manner in why rather these set of vaccines were created or rather were made so quickly. And one question is, why has the same concept not worked in relation to producing an HIV vaccine? I'll allow you to answer that.
Right, so I'll ask you to just, can you ask all the questions together so that I can just get a feel for them, and then I'll go through each one at a time?
Sorry, can I interrupt you, Brother Bima? Sorry, Brother Arnold. Sorry, I'm just so sorry to do this. I did not know that we had to submit questions through. Mine is not a question. It's really just a comment based on what I have heard the speaker present. If I start writing.
All right, thank you very much. Sorry, okay, you can proceed. Yes,
thank you very
proceed. Just for the sake of time, I'll give you 2 minutes. 2 minutes, and then the presenter can respond.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I thank the presenter for his lengthy presentation and for his eloquence, but I still feel that somehow there's some biasness, because this vaccine, if this presentation that he made was a true presentation and a clear, well-balanced view of the vaccine, he should have also mentioned the side effects of the vaccine that we're seeing in Africa within the people that we know and abroad. The deaths that the elderly people are sustaining here in Africa because of the vaccine, he did not mention. This gives somehow a biased view. He mentioned about magnetism. We know about magnetism. People that have been vaccinated, we've seen them around us. We've done tests. We've seen objects being stuck to them. That is the magnetism that is being spoken of. And as an Adventist brother, I really thought, and as a doctor, I really was expecting a well-balanced view on this vaccine and the side effects and everything that it is doing to our people all over. But he never mentioned.
You've got 1 more minute, my brother, 1 more minute, and then we need to move on.
Okay. It's not enough, because there's so much that I can say. I've already cut out half of what I was saying. I'm going to go to the last part that he spoke about, which is the vaccine not being the mark of the beast, which is correct. That is very correct. But there's one thing that is very clear that we must understand, that the vaccine, this dubious vaccine, and the way that it has been brought about, when there are many diseases that have been killing our people right across the globe that have not had a rushed vaccine, for a disease that has a more than a 90% recovery rate from home, there's a vaccine that has been rushed upon us, which has such a rigorous method of bringing it to the people, and is costing so many millions across the globe for something that can 90% people are, more than 90% people are recovering from home. Bill Gates himself, in his own mouth, mentioned, he is one of the people that has been behind this vaccine from the beginning, that the vaccine itself is going to be tracked. And that is why when you are taking a vaccine, you have to have a clear record of the vaccine that you have been vaccinated globally. You cannot take this vaccine like polio. If you go back to the hospital where you took your polio vaccine today, you will not be able to find the record. But this and some of these diseases are much more deadlier than this corona, but there's no record of them. This particular vaccine is different. This particular illness is different. All other diseases have disappeared. It's only now
All
corona.
right, Brother Anile, thank you very
Can
much.
I just finish off? Give me a few more seconds.
We have quite a number of questions we need to tackle. So
Right.
a
few more
I'll
seconds
give you
to
20
finish.
seconds.
Right. Now, I want to submit to you to say that, yes, it's right. It is not the mark of the beast, but it is the vehicle that is going to be used to issue or to bring about the mark of the beast, because we can see, or in other countries now, it is being used to enforce people to do certain actions that are not desirable, that infringe on their liberties. People are not being able to buy or sell because they have not taken the vaccine. And it is going to be used as a vehicle to force people not to be able to buy or sell. Yes, the mark of the beast is the National Sunday Law, but this is the vehicle that is going to be used to force people not to be able to buy or sell unless they take or unless they adhere to the mark of the beast. This is something that is very clear that we must understand and we must be able to see.
All right, thank you very much, Brother Anile. I will give Dr. Mapondera an opportunity. Maybe you can respond to this contribution first, then we go to the other written questions. And maybe just a reminder to all participants, so if you have a question, a contribution, please feel free to be typing it now, and then we will be able to give Dr. Mapondera an opportunity to respond. Dr. Mapondera, I'll allow you to respond.
All right. Thank you. So I'll respond to the first question about HIV and why we don't have a vaccine for HIV. So with regards to the sheer number of mutations that the HIV virus can actually conjure up, it is very difficult to actually get a vaccine that will be able to target the sheer number and quantity of the mutations that it is able to generate, number one. Number two, what is typical about HIV is that it tends to hide within the reticular endothelial system. This is basically part of the immune system, and it can hide there away from detection, multiplying at a slow rate, mutating at many different portions of its genetic makeup. And as a result, it's very, very difficult to actually create a vaccine that will fight and combat HIV. They have been trying for quite a number of years, but they've been failing because of this unique nature of the HIV virus. Now, with regards to my brother and his contributions, we really appreciate all opinions with regards to the coronavirus vaccines. And we must remember, these are personal opinions which are allowed. But the official position of the church is that vaccination is not a sin, number one. Number two, vaccination is based on true science. Vaccination is based on true science, not false science. Number three, you must remember what we said in our presentation, that there are many modalities that you can use to combat yourself from getting coronavirus. Yes, you may say a few people have died. We said about 4 million people have died, but every life counts. If you read the book Great Controversy, she actually states that the plan of the wicked one is to fill the world with mayhem, death, and destruction so that he can lock away a lot of people away from being prepared for the judgment and for the coming of Christ. He wants to prevent people from repenting, seeing the error of their ways, and reforming their ways. And he does this by multiplying death, mayhem, and destruction. While you may say a few souls is sufficient enough to discount any of the means that are being presented to combat the spread of the virus, I believe that even one soul is important for salvation. And with whatever means that we have at our disposal, let us lay a hold of those means. And we have found that in certain locales where the vaccines have actually been used, there's been a dramatic reduction in the numbers of serious coronavirus infections. And when I mean serious, I mean those who constitute the 14% and the 5% we mentioned earlier on, the severe and the critical, those who need to be admitted for oxygen, those who need to be intubated. In fact, I have an uncle who worked in one such unit in the United Kingdom, and he was here recently, and I did ask him with regards to the impact of vaccination and what's going on in the United Kingdom. And he mentioned to me that there's been a dramatic reduction in the number of severe coronavirus cases because of the vaccination campaign that has been going on there. So while we respect personal opinion, we must elevate the position of the church. Yes, you may present your opinion in a forceful manner, which we appreciate, but here we are saying that as a movement, we do not condemn vaccination. No matter what your opinion may be, we respect your opinion, but the position of the church, and for those who are non-Adventists who are listening out there with regards to the Seventh-day Adventist movement, we are not against vaccinations. Vaccinations, we believe, are based on true science. Vaccinations, we believe, are helping in this particular pandemic. Now, you mentioned earlier on that the elderly are dying and so on and so on. Remember that those who are at highest risk of developing severe coronavirus are, number one, the elderly, who already, in more cases than not, have a number of comorbidities that they already have that make it very likely that they'll develop severe coronavirus, hypertension, diabetes, and so on. So all these are found within the elderly population, in addition to their age. Their ability to respond well to a threat or a microbial threat is different from those of younger individuals. This is why you find that there's a preponderance of those who are dying within that age group or those who are dying with these comorbidities. So the fact that one then says that the elderly are dying in old people's homes and so on, already they have a number of factors that were already within them that already set them on that path already. And there's been no causal link with the vaccine to say the vaccine caused their death. So to say that those in old people's home are dying because of the vaccine is not substantiated. That is not correct. So I think I'm glad that you have got your opinion with regard to this, but I need to set the position of the church clear. Vaccines is an acceptable medical therapy in the Seventh-day Adventist movement. Now, you've mentioned that the vaccines are going to usher in the Sunday law. That is false, patently. It is not anywhere in our religious books. It is not anywhere in Great Controversy. It is not anywhere in Ellen White's writings. Let us not present such to the world. Let us not link the vaccines themselves to the world. The methods that governments are going to start using to perhaps coerce people to take the vaccines may be the same, but the vaccine itself is nothing to do with the Sunday law. It's nothing to do with the final test upon humanity. And I don't want us to then use that as a diversion from the true issues at stake. Great Controversy, early writings, and all books that we adhere to do not say anything about vaccination, but they do say that governments are going to use their political muscle to enforce regulations that are contrary to the will of God. And those regulations are to do with the law of God. So I don't want vaccinations to become a distraction. The means to the ends may be similar, but it's totally two different things. So I think in a nutshell, that's as far as I will go. Let us respect the position of the church. Let us not spread certain, should I say, opinions out there and present them as though they are the church's official position. That is incorrect and it is wrong. Thank you. To the moderator.
All right, thank you very much, Doc, for that. So our next question is, what is the cause of vaccinated people testing positive to COVID-19 if the vaccine does suppress the multiplication of the virus in the body? Maybe you can tackle that question with this one as well, that says, does a person who had recovered from COVID-19 become immune to COVID-19? Perhaps the later one you had answered it earlier, but maybe for the sake of our audience, you can tackle it again.
All right, thank you so much to the moderator. So with regards to someone being vaccinated who then tests positive, there are several possibilities. Number one, at the time that you were actually vaccinated, you may have been infected with the virus and it was not detected. You see, as a policy right now, they are not testing those who are being vaccinated to check whether or not they have the virus. what they're doing is they're saying if you have no symptoms whatsoever, you can present at your local clinic and whatever and get vaccinated. So it may be that you actually had the virus before the vaccination. Number two, the immunity that the vaccine affords is not instantaneous. It is developed over weeks. And when you're initially inoculated with the first dose, for example, for those 2-dose vaccines, you develop an immunity that is up to a certain degree. When you get the second dose, you then develop immunity that is much higher than the initial immunity provided by the first dose. So there are the differences in the degrees of protection that are available to a vaccinated individual. Thirdly, the major benefit we're seeing with the vaccines is not necessarily the prevention of infections, but it is the reduction in the number of severe coronavirus cases, which are more likely to lead in mortality. So you'll find that the efficacy in reducing the spread or infection rates may diminish over time with the emergence of new variants. But what we're seeing is that the ability of the vaccines to reduce the severity of your coronavirus remains very high. So it is still a very good modality to incorporate within the whole body of preventative measures that we have available, which include lifestyle adjustments, which include masking up, sanitizing well, social distancing, and as I said, and lastly, vaccinations. So it is an important arm in all the modalities that are available that we can use to prevent ourselves from getting coronavirus. Then there was another question. If you can just repeat the other question. If someone is infected with coronavirus, can they be infected again? If they had a previous infection, can they get another infection? So what they've noticed is you can get reinfected with coronavirus. And the reasons are, number one, you may be infected with a different variant from the one you may have had before. Immunity to a natural coronavirus infection is lasting about 3 to about 6 months. So there are chances that you may get reinfected with coronavirus, and more so with the emergence of new and different variants. These variants have slightly different features from the previous variant that you're exposed to, and this makes you susceptible to reinfection. So it is quite possible. But the good thing that we note, and I'm coming back to the vaccine story, the good thing that we note with the vaccines is that they add an extra layer of protection to whatever your adaptive immunity has developed through natural infection. So they are still an important arm to be used in combating the spread of the virus. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Doc. So our next question is, may you please speak to the conspiracy theory that vaccines have been created or designed to sterilize humans? There's a video clip of a Professor Sir John Bell of Oxford University circulating on social media. Why would the esteemed professor be recorded saying this?
Okay, thank you so much. So the very nature of conspiracy theories is that, one, there's usually a so-called esteemed member of the scientific community who is expressing their so-called personal opinions with regards to a matter. Those opinions of which cannot be substantiated with evidence on the ground. So, as one of the tenets of our faith, there's the tenet of thou shalt not bear false witness. By the testimony of 2 or more witnesses is a thing established. The evidence that is emanated from all the development of the vaccines, we have mentioned that a vaccine goes through an exploratory phase, it goes through a preclinical trial, it goes through a clinical trial, it goes through approval by several bodies within the country, without the country. So all these are measures that have been put in place by the medical fraternity to ensure that whatever is coming out onto the market has some level of protection, is not going to be deleterious or dangerous for those who are going to be consuming it. So several things have been done, several research is peer-reviewed. So one professor standing up and declaring his opinion based on evidence that cannot be verified, cannot be taken as gospel. This is the very nature of conspiracy theories and the infodemic that has been spreading with this coronavirus. That someone in some corner who has some high-sounding title comes up and says some statement based on his own opinion and then peddles that as the truth and as gospel. which we are rejecting by saying that what we have seen with how the vaccines have been developed is that they go through a multi-stage peer-reviewed process. And these vaccines have gone through that process. And just out, people have come up to me saying, no, this thing was designed to kill the Black population and so on and so on. Where have we even seen most of the deaths in this country? Where have we seen most of the deaths in this world? So the issue of conspiracy theories is one of the major problems with this infodemic, because it then gives or creates this reluctance to seek medical interventions when someone becomes sick with coronavirus, to seek all the modalities that have been developed to add a layer of protection upon those who are exposed to this pandemic. So I would categorically reject such notions because they are not supported by any concrete evidence. They are not supported. So I would reject whether it's a high-sounding professor or whatsoever it is. Let's look at the peer-reviewed research that has been done within the medical fraternity, and let's take that and make our decisions. And remember what I said as I closed my remarks earlier on. It is a personal decision. Do not make your opinion the basis of the final test upon humanity. Don't make your opinion the arbiter of what shall happen to someone's eternal life. The position of our movement is vaccination is an acceptable science. Whether you choose to take it or not must be your own opinion. It must be your own personal preserve. But do not then go and stretch forth your hand and block others from taking vaccination because of your own personal opinions. The church's position is vaccination is an acceptable science. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Doc. Just a few more questions. So there are two questions that are somewhat related. And the first question says, please, may you thoroughly explain why the vaccination is not recommended for pregnant and breastfeeding women? Are there possible concerns if the pregnant get vaccinated? Then the other related question is, we need to know the safety of the vaccine on expecting women and those that are breastfeeding.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. So with regards to pregnant women and so on, when these vaccines were initially developed, the initial research was done in non-pregnant women, in non-lactating women, the initial research. So the initial guidelines that came out with regards to the vaccinations excluded this group. It excluded the young as well. Those who were below 16 years old were excluded initially. But you find that Pfizer has now come up with new regulations with their vaccine that it's actually safe in 12-year-olds. So this had to do with the initial research that was done. It was done in groups that were not pregnant, that were not lactating. But as they have been continuing to research on the vaccines, new guidelines are going to be published as we go along. Some of the possible things that may happen in pregnant women who may be vaccinated, similar to what would happen in a coronavirus infection, are to do with premature deliveries and so on. Because one of the potential side effects of any vaccination is that you may have a temporary elevation of temperature and so on, and this can trigger or possibly trigger a miscarriage. So as a warning, until sufficient research has been done in that particular group, the guidelines are saying, for now, do not inoculate pregnant women. So essentially, this is what is happening. But as more and more research is coming to light, more and more groups are going to be included in the guidelines for those requiring vaccination.
All right, thank you very much, Doc. Then I think this is a question that relates to the issue of the mark of the beast. Can you please explain whether the mark of the beast will come in the form of a physical feature on one's body, or whether, as you say, it's spiritual? I think this is just to make it clear that what really is the mark of the beast. Hollywood has told us that there's a stamp that's put on one's forehead that says 666. There's a child that's born with the number 666. Is it something physical or it's something that's spiritual?
Okay, thank you so much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, the real mark of the beast is coming. Let me say that again. The real mark of the beast is coming. The real mark of the beast is coming. And the real mark of the beast centers around obedience to the law of God. It centers around issues to do with worship. It centers around religious political order that will be instituted to enforce disobedience to God's laws. So the mark of the beast, unlike the popular sentiment expressed in Hollywood features, is not a microchip. It is not a stamp. It is not some number that is put on you at some polling station. The mark of the beast is a spiritual position that you will take contrary to the law and the will of God, acquiescing or agreeing to the statutes and dictates of men. The final test is not about vaccinations. The means with which certain governments may use to enforce vaccination may be the same means, because governments by nature use coercion, they use regulations, they use laws to enforce or to enact certain behaviors in the populations. This is how governments operate. But the vaccine itself, I repeat, is not the mark of the beast. It is not the mark of the beast. The mark of the beast has to do with the law of God, it has to do with worship, it has to do with a religious political organization that will enforce disobedience to God on the pain of death, persecution, and sanctions. That's what the mark of the beast is all about. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Doc. There is just one more question that I feel we should tackle. So the writer says, Dr. Mapondera, yes, we don't condemn vaccines, but what do you think about us focusing on the 5% that is dying, but instead, as Adventists, channeling 95% of our educational efforts on addressing the issue of comorbidities, and therefore making vaccines not a necessary modality of choice?
Thank you so much. Now imagine there's a fire in your house and your children are in the house. Would you go into the house and start educating people to say, we should have had asbestos in here. We should have had another escape route. Oh, listen, we should have had a water hose in the house. Would you go and do that? Or you would raise the alarm and you would throw the kids out the window or whatever means necessary, while you then think of measures to mitigate against future such events. We are facing a crisis, number one, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, you can educate, but at the moment we are saying combine education with the available means at hand. Not everyone is a vegetarian. Not everyone adheres to lifestyle medicine. Not everyone adheres to lifestyle practices. People out there have been living their lives with different practices, different habits, and so on. Why should we deny them the means at hand to mitigate against them getting coronavirus or severe coronavirus because of our personal belief? Why should we enforce and label them as sinners because we ourselves have been adhering to certain practices? Why? Why should we as Adventists have that kind of attitude? We must save life. That is the principle of Adventism. Preserve life. That is the principle. You educate as you preserve life. You don't say, I will condemn anyone who takes the vaccine because I want to teach them about the health reform first. And when they are sufficiently vegetarian and everything, then I'll give them the vaccine. That is not how we operate as a movement. And the question that someone said that, why are we so concerned with the vaccine when so few are dying? Jesus would have come to planet Earth for one soul that is sinned. Who are you to say that one soul is not important enough? We are to be Christ-like in our thinking and mentality. Every death is important. I think of my mother, I think of my aunts, I think of my uncles, I think of my relatives and friends. Any death among that company is painful enough to me. Why is it that the death of another family member in America or in Papua New Guinea does not touch your heart? Let us not belittle the pain and suffering that this condition is causing out there. There's no such thing as saying so few people are dying, why the concern? That one person is a loved one to somebody. It is not the Adventist way, it is not the Christian way to belittle the suffering that is going out there in humanity. So I condemn categorically such notions that so few people are dying, so why the emphasis? The emphasis is, let us lay a hold of all the means available to us now as we educate the world. That, I believe, is the humane manner and the humane way of doing things. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Doc. There's a question from Tokozisi. I'm sorry, brother Mthokozisa, I hadn't seen your question. I was not avoiding you, as I think you feared. So many questions, and I think the feed is getting updated almost every second. So it's a bit of a long one. I'll try to be as precise as I can in reading. So he says, Dr. Michael Yendon, formerly Pfizer Vice President, and Dr. Robert Malone, who actually invented mRNA vaccine technology, and another doctor who got a Nobel Peace Prize for discovering the HIV virus, are top vaccine and virology authorities. They have put their reputations on the line and put their heads on the block to say that the long-term safety of these vaccines are not known, and that many people are dying from clots and other complications linked to these jabs. Yet they are cheap and simple treatments which are not affected by different variants. They also say these vaccines lose their effectiveness after a few months. Do we have reason not to listen to these top scientists? These are far from being quack doctors, and they quote research that has been done. Many have spoken out, but they are being censored. Try posting their stuff on Facebook or Twitter or even Messenger, and you'll be blocked. That's the question from Brother Mthokozisa.
Okay, thank you so much. So there were concerns with regards to certain vaccines, all right? The adenoviral vector vaccines causing clots in women of childbearing age and so on. And we had about 6 million cases where people develop these potentially fatal clots. Now, every life is important, but what they've noticed is that the risk reduction in reducing your chances of getting severe coronavirus, reducing your chances of getting infection is much better than the risk of getting these severe clots. Again, I'll repeat, people will have their certain personal opinions with regards to the vaccines. The researchers who developed the mRNA vaccines, what you should note from my presentation was, these vaccines do not affect the DNA of the human physiology. They don't go into the nucleus. They don't go into the DNA. Where they work is in the ribosomes, in the cytoplasm for a few minutes or a few seconds, microseconds even, where they facilitate the production of viral spike proteins that enable the body to create antibodies to fight coronavirus. So this is the technology that's out there. If, for example, you're not comfortable in utilizing this new technology, please note there's a supermarket of vaccines that are currently available and being developed. Sinopharm, Sinovac, Covaxin are not part of the new technology. They're actually part of the old technology we are used to with regards to vaccines. They're the same technology that we know with the polio vaccine, the measles vaccines, and so on. So if you have questions with regards to the emerging technology of mRNA vaccines, adenoviral vector vaccines, you have an option to stick with the older methods that have been used before, and this is what choice we have as humanity. You can choose to go for Sinopharm, you can choose to go for Sinovac if the mRNA vaccines are vaccines of concern to you. So in a nutshell, I think I'll answer in that way.
All right, thank you very much. Allow me to put the discussion to a close by maybe entertaining this last question. I see our time is fast running out. So there is one last question, and the question says, is the church doing anything essentially with regards to the violation of people's liberties by being forced to take these vaccines?
Can you repeat that question, please?
So the question, maybe let me just read it as is. So the question is, what's the church's position on the violation of people's liberties for not receiving the vaccine?
Okay, so remember the church has what we call the religious liberty arm. This religious liberty arm believes that people have a right to worship in whatsoever manner they wish to worship. It's religious liberty basically defends the rights of the individual to make a choice with regards to how they worship, how they conduct themselves, how they conduct their lives. Now, the church's position is to highlight where principle is being violated. That's the church's position. Force with regards to vaccination, I don't believe in it personally. I don't believe anyone should be forced to receive the vaccine. Let me put it blank. The church doesn't believe in that either. That force with regards to the vaccine is not the correct way. People must be given a choice. I choose to be vaccinated, go ahead, without condemnation. I choose not to be vaccinated, go ahead, with no condemnation. So this is the position that the church has, that vaccination is a choice. The church does not believe in forced vaccination. That is not the position of the church. The church believes that it is a free choice that individuals can make on their own at their own leisure. So that's the position of the church. I'm not aware of any other position that the church has with regards to this particular topic, but that's the position of the church. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Doc. I know I'd said that was the last question. Maybe there's just one last one I thought was pertinent, and it has just popped up on our feed. So the question it says, there have been reports of blood clotting and deaths. This should be addressed if such presentations are to be taken as unbiased. Let's not be emotional. People need answers. If there are side effects that have been recorded with any vaccinations, why hide them or become angry when people ask questions? Maybe before you answer, Doc, correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding, obviously, as a parent that is taking children to be immunized, there is no vaccine that is without side effects. Yes. Almost every vaccine has caused deaths so far as I'm aware, or so far as has been explained to me at yes. Immunization clinics. If you can address that, including the question I've just read out.
All right, thank you. So we mentioned in passing earlier on with regards to some of the adenoviral vector vaccines, where we had development of clots in women of childbearing age. And the statistics are you had 6 women out of 6 million who were vaccinated who developed those clots. After further research, it was then found that the vaccine, the risk of the clots is much less than one getting coronavirus or getting severe coronavirus. So those vaccines are still being used today. The other thing you must note is that some of the buffers and some of the chemicals that are used to preserve the vaccine in a usable format, people may have allergies to some of these chemicals. And part of the notification is, if you have allergies to any of the components of the vaccine, you must not be vaccinated with the vaccine, because you're more likely to develop an adverse reaction to the vaccine when you're inoculated. So this is something that individuals who are getting vaccinated must be aware of and must take note of, and ask for the safety card of the vaccine to look at the chemicals and say, look, I think I'm allergic to this, I've reacted to it before. You see, so scientists themselves are saying there is a possibility that you may have an adverse reaction to a vaccine. You may not know what you're allergic to. That most of us don't even know what we're allergic to. And this is why they've got a section where they ask you, they observe you after vaccination for at least 30 minutes to see whether you're developing an adverse event after inoculation. Right? So they observe you and see if you're developing an adverse event, and they've got medical personnel or professionals on hand to neutralize or to give you or to intervene should you then develop an adverse reaction to any of the vaccines. So those are available and on hand, and it's noted, it's well documented, because some of the buffers, the chemicals we use to preserve the vaccines, people may develop a reaction to. This is a warning that is given. If scientists were not giving that warning, then we would have a concern. But they're giving the warning because they understand that this is a potential complication that may develop with the vaccines. And they've given ample warning. They give the safety card freely for people to look at and know the risks and make a choice. So the important thing to remember is you have a choice to take it or not to take it. If your choice is the risk of side effects is too high for me to take the vaccine, then don't take it. But do not condemn the individual who says, I would rather take the risk and get vaccinated. This is the central theme of this message. The central theme of this presentation is, it is a matter of choice. You may be within a religious organization, but through, say, your opinion, your forceful manner, and so on, you may be forcing individuals to decide against the vaccine. You are just as equally liable as a government that is forcing people to get vaccinated. What we want to present in this presentation is the vaccines are not, they're not the balm of Gilead. No one has said that. But they're a modality that is available to help mitigate the risks of severe coronavirus. The technology is sound. We understand it. Yes, mRNA vaccines, adenoviral vector vaccines are new technology. If you're not happy with them, you feel that it's too risky, we've got the old technology that has been proven to work time and time again with common ailments in the past, polio vaccine, measles vaccine, and so on, then you can choose and opt for those. This is why all this information has been presented. So I'm not here to stand up and deny that vaccines are totally complicationless. Forgive my English. I'm not here to say that, but I'm here to say that given the complications, given the risks in your setting, given the sweet small voice speaking behind you of the Spirit of God speaking to you individually, make your choice according to your circumstance, your situation, and according to the dictates of your conscience. That is what we are presenting in today's presentation. We are not presenting for or against. We're saying it is your choice, and you are not condemned by God because you chose to get vaccinated. That we are denying and we're rejecting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc. So let's put the discussion to a close, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe firstly, let me thank everyone that has participated in this discussion. Admittedly, we all have got very strong views regarding the issue of vaccination, but the purpose of this discussion was never really to support one position over the other. It was to establish the truth, which I think is the motto that we as Adventists go with, to the law and to the testimony. So we appreciate Dr. Mapondera has taken time to take us through, what I would say is a very well-researched presentation, whether we may agree with it or not. I think the other important aspect was to address the issue of the mark of the beast. We need to understand what the mark of the beast is, so that whatever our misgivings or our support of vaccines is not clouded by a false position on what the mark of the beast is. The prayer is that people will be able to make informed decisions about their health, whether or not they decide to take the vaccine or not. But ultimately, that we should not impute any of our positions on the vaccine on what the church says or on what the Bible says. I am going to give Mr. Munyamtema an opportunity to give us concluding remarks, and then after that, he's going to pray for us. Before he does speak, just want to remind you that we will have a recording of this presentation. It will also be on Facebook, I think within an hour. That is on the Midnight Cry account, the Midnight Cry. If you do want this recording as well, you can get hold of me. My name is Arnold Bima, or you can get hold of Mr. Daniel Mtangadura. I think you may require our numbers. Perhaps Mr. Mtangadura, as Elder Mtema is concluding, if you can also just post our numbers so that people can have them and we can share this presentation. Mr. Mtema, this is your time.
Thank you, Advocate. Thank you, Doc. We want to thank God for the time we've had. Allow me to say thank you for highlighting that the true mark of the beast is coming. And allow me also to say that to refuse medical intervention of whatever sort and yet live in continuous violation of God's physical is not fair on everyone. And allow me to say it's treason. It is not fair to expect God to protect us from diseases when we live in continuous violation to his physical laws. There are some who are encouraging others to refuse medical intervention when they are in continuously when they are continuously living in violation of God's laws. Just food for thought. Shall we close our eyes for prayer? Our Father in heaven, thank you so much for the lesson we have heard. Forgive us if we peradventure had any wrong motives, connotations, and assumptions. But we want to thank you for the presentation that was made and help us to make the right choices based on the circumstances that we have. We do have people, dear Lord, who have never heard the health message, and they've been continuously violating the laws of health unknowingly. To such, Lord, may you grant them the wisdom to do what is right. And there are some amongst us, dear Lord, whom you have given so much light, and they've been doing their best to live according to the laws of health. May you grant them good health, And if they decide not to have any intervention, may you protect them, because you promised that none of these diseases will be upon such. So help us, dear Lord, to make the right decision that are based on our different circumstances. And thank you for highlighting to us through Doc that the vaccine is not the mark of the beast, though you highlighted that the mark of the beast will truly come and will soon be upon us. Help us to understand your word. And once again, dear Lord, thank you. If peradventure there's anyone who has been affected by the discussions, the questions, the responses, please, Father, in the Spirit of Christ, may we forgive each other. May we pray one for another. Above all, may we not lose heaven when all has been said and done. Once again, Lord, thank you. And may you keep us safe despite these pandemics. If there's someone amongst us who has been infected or affected, the balm of them before the sun sets in these holy hours. Thank you, dear Lord. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Elder Mutema. Thank you to everyone that has participated. My